I caught the HOA president standing in my driveway at 6 a.m., holding a clipboard like she owned the place. No ring on the bell, no knock. She was just strolling around my truck, scribbling violations for a property she had zero legal authority over. I stepped outside, told her, "I'm not under your HOA," and you could tell by the way she smirked that she'd heard that excuse 100 times. Then, without a word, she snapped a picture of my house and said, "Then the county sheriff can explain it to you." She called the cops on me for not following HOA rules on a property they didn't control. But here's what she didn't know. This land isn't just outside her HOA's reach. It's the last remaining piece of the original parcel the developer built the neighborhood around. And legally, I own the private road that everyone drives on, including the HOA president. I'm a 34-year-old contractor who spent half his life dealing with county permits, property boundaries, and zoning codes that most people ignore until they get burned by them. I'm not rich. I'm not connected. I don't go looking for a fight. I just wanted one thing: space. After years of cramped rentals, I bought an older house on a 1.7-acre lot, one of the last unincorporated pockets left after developers swallowed everything around it. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine. Quiet, surrounded by a neighborhood of symmetrical houses, perfect lawns, and matching mailboxes. The developer had tried to buy it years ago, but the previous owner refused. So they built the whole subdivision around it like a ring tightening around a stone. For a while, I didn't mind being the odd lot, the house in the middle of the chaos. My workshop hummed past sunset, and nobody had the right to tell me otherwise. But then came the resentment. The HOA didn't like that my land sat outside their control. No dues, no rules, no architectural approvals. They hated that my truck, my tools, and my freedoms didn't belong to them. And the neighbors, they followed their lead, whispering behind fences and driveways. "He thinks he's better than us," became the neighborhood anthem. I tried to ignore the looks, the comments, the subtle tension, but I had no idea how deep their frustration ran or how far they were willing to go until they crossed my property line. I bought this place during the housing crisis when banks were practically begging anyone to take foreclosed homes off their hands. Most people overlooked it because it didn't have the shiny roofs and perfect lawns developers love to advertise, but when I saw the listing with its faded paint and stubborn weeds pushing through cracked concrete, something clicked. I'd spent years working with county permits and zoning codes as a contractor, so the words county island and rural residential didn't scare me, they intrigued me. Most people don't even know what those terms mean. I did, and I knew exactly what kind of freedom they came with. This land predates every HOA built around it long before the subdivision existed. It was a standalone parcel recorded under the county's jurisdiction, not any cities or associations. The zoning R a rare gift. It meant I could run a workshop, store trailers, keep equipment, and modify the house without begging a board for permission. No architectural committee, no color palette rules, no fines for having a truck that didn't meet suburban standards. My place had a private access road looping around it, a utility easement tucked behind the workshop, and enough open space for me to work late without disturbing anyone. Or so I thought. The HOA hated every part of it. Their rules forbade everything I was legally allowed to do. They had restrictions on trailer storage I didn't. They banned work sheds. I had one fully permitted. They micromanaged fence heights, trim colors, parking layouts, and even lawn species. I didn't have to follow any of it. And that drove them crazy. It didn't take long for Cheryl, the HOA president, to make herself known. She showed up 2 days after I moved in, carrying a glossy welcome packet like she was presenting a gift. She introduced herself like she was the mayor of a small, perfect country. Cheryl was a realtor, with the confidence of someone who believed every inch of this neighborhood existed because she allowed it. She had a blonde bob, a stiff posture, and lips pressed tight like she was holding in a complaint. Behind her were the board members, the treasurer, a quiet man who never made eye contact and seemed to agree with anything, the secretary, a retired teacher who moved like she'd spent 40 years shushing people, and the enforcer, a smug, athletic guy who had a habit of filming neighbors on his phone, supposedly documenting violations. They stood behind Cheryl like a jury ready to deliver a verdict. When Cheryl handed me the welcome packet, I told her politely, "I'm not part of your HOA." She gave a smile so tight it almost looked painful. "Everyone here contributes to community standards," she replied, like it was a command, not a suggestion. That was my first clue. She didn't see my property as separate. She saw it as a challenge. I walked inside thinking it would end there. I was wrong. That brief exchange with Cheryl marked the beginning of a conflict she had been waiting years to start. The subdivision had grown around this lot like a cage built around an animal they never managed to relocate. To the HOA, my purchase meant the odd lot was no longer a neglected structure. It was now inhabited, maintained, and legally fortified by someone who knew exactly where their authority ended. And that alone made me a threat. The first weeks were quiet. I focused on repairing the roof, clearing debris, and cataloging what needed inspection before monsoon season, but I could feel eyes on me every time I stepped outside. Curtains shifted, garage doors paused halfway down. People walking their dogs slowed just enough to stare at the trailers I parked neatly along the fence. No one said anything, not yet, but the unspoken message hung in the air. I didn't belong in their picture-perfect layout. Cheryl made sure that message spread. I overheard her telling a couple at the mailbox that I was already resisting community guidelines. Then one day I caught the enforcer filming my truck while I loaded materials. When I stepped toward him, he pretended to adjust his phone. "Just documenting," he muttered. The secretary would wave politely, but her eyes were always scanning my yard, taking mental inventory for her report. Their behavior wasn't random. It was coordinated. A subtle tightening of pressure meant to push me into compliance or force me to leave. But the real tension began when Cheryl tried again to establish dominance. She left another packet on my door, this time with highlighted sections and a handwritten note. "Please review. You are expected to maintain neighborhood standards." I walked to her house that evening holding the packet. She met me on her porch with crossed arms. "Cheryl," I said, keeping my voice calm, "I'm outside your jurisdiction." She stared at me with a mix of disbelief and entitlement. "That's not how this community works," she snapped. "Everyone here follows the rules," I replied. "Everyone under the HOA follows the rules. I don't." That was the moment she stopped pretending it was a misunderstanding. It became personal. The stakes became clearer with every interaction. My privacy was on the line, and so was my business reputation. Rumors spread fast in tight neighborhoods, especially ones with a hyper-controlling president at the center. If Cheryl accused me of improper construction or unpermitted work, clients could hear about it before the county even inspected. And if the HOA lied to authorities, which I later learned they had done to others, the consequences could be expensive and damaging. On their side, the motive was simple control. Bringing my land under their rules would strengthen their grip on the neighborhood and boost property values. But they underestimated one thing, me. The fake notices started flooding in. One was taped to my door early one morning, a bright yellow sheet screaming "violation" across the top. It listed things like improper storage, unapproved exterior structures, and unsightly equipment, none of which applied to me, but the intention was clear. Intimidation. 2 days later, another notice appeared. This one was red, accusing me of ignoring community standards. I pulled it off the door, noticing faint fingerprints where someone had pressed hard against the paper. Soon, photos began circulating. I caught Cheryl standing near my property line with her phone out, snapping pictures like she was documenting a crime scene. I stepped outside, asked, "Can I help you?" She didn't even look at me. "We don't tolerate disorder here," she shouted across the fence. Her voice was sharp enough to cut the morning air. I told her again, "I'm not under your HOA." She waved dismissively and snapped another photo. It was clear she wasn't listening. She was building a case, even if it was imaginary. Things escalated quickly after that. One Saturday afternoon, I heard footsteps in my backyard. The gravel crunched under boots. When I stepped out, I saw Cheryl and 2 board members strolling around like they were on a guided tour. The enforcer held a clipboard, scribbling notes while scanning the ground. I asked, "What do you think you're doing?" Cheryl didn't flinch. "Common area review," she said coldly, as if reading from a script. I pointed at the ground. "This is private property." The treasurer looked nervous, but Cheryl doubled down. "We have the right to ensure compliance." I stepped closer. "You don't have any rights here. Leave." The enforcer lifted his phone, ready to record, but eventually they shuffled off, muttering about documentation. Word spread fast. Neighbors who used to wave politely now avoided eye contact. I overheard 2 women at the mailbox whispering, He's avoiding dues. That's why he's so defensive. One said, Cheryl told me he thinks he's special. And a kid riding a scooter stopped at the edge of my driveway. My mom says you're ruining the community. That was the moment I knew it was more than just an HOA issue. Cheryl had poisoned the entire neighborhood against me, turning gossip into a weapon. I knew I couldn't ignore the situation anymore. Cheryl wasn't just trying to annoy me, she was trying to destroy my reputation, turn the neighborhood, the deputies, and even my clients against me. She wanted me isolated, overwhelmed, and desperate enough to sell. I had no intention of letting that happen.